At 68, Henry Carter, a retired federal prosecutor, believed the secret to staying youthful was keeping active. Each morning, he jogged through the peaceful streets of Maplewood, a suburban town renowned for its lush parks and friendly community. One brisk Thursday, his routine took an unexpected turn. Henry passed by an old cafe near a narrow lane and caught the faint sound of a distressed cry. Pausing, he noticed an elderly woman in a tussle with two young men. One yanked her handbag, while the other attempted to remove her watch. "Hey, leave her alone!" Henry's voice boomed. The startled men turned, locking eyes with the imposing figure of the older man. For a split second, they hesitated, then bolted into the alley, vanishing into the maze of back streets. Henry sighed. "Cowards," he muttered, deciding against chasing them. His running days were for fitness, not pursuits. Turning to the woman, who clutched her torn handbag strap with trembling hands, he approached gently. "Are you hurt?" Henry asked, his voice calm and reassuring. "They took my wallet," she said through sobs, shaking her head. "But I'm not hurt, thanks to you." Just as Henry was about to respond, the wail of sirens interrupted the moment. A police car screeched to a stop nearby, and Officer Mark Hendricks stepped out, his hand resting firmly on his belt. His sharp gaze landed on Henry, who stood beside the distressed woman. "Step away from her," Mark ordered, his tone stern. Henry raised his hands in surprise. "Officer, I was helping her." "Step back now," Mark repeated, moving closer. The elderly woman interjected. No, you've got it wrong. He saved me." "Ma'am, stay calm. I'll handle this," Mark said, cutting her off as he kept his eyes locked on Henry. Henry sighed and complied, stepping back with his hands raised. "Officer, there's been a misunderstanding." Mark's skepticism was palpable. "What were you doing here? Trying to make a quick getaway?" Henry's calm expression hardened. "I was stopping the real criminals. They ran off before you got here." Mark didn't seem interested. "You expect me to believe that?" By now, a small crowd had gathered, some pulling out their phones to record the scene. Henry could feel the tension rising, but remained composed. He knew the danger of escalating the situation further. "I've spent decades serving the law, officer." "You're making a mistake," Henry said, his voice steady but firm. "Yeah, right," Mark scoffed, his hand moving toward his holster. "Keep talking, old man." Henry took a slow, deliberate breath. "I'm reaching for my ID," he said, moving cautiously. "Don't move," Mark shouted, drawing his firearm. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Henry froze. "Easy. Just my badge." Slowly, he pulled out his identification, a gleaming badge stamped with the insignia of the Justice Department. Holding it up, he said firmly, "I'm Henry Carter, former federal prosecutor." Mark blinked, his grip on the gun loosening as he processed the words. The murmurs of the crowd grew louder. Finally, Mark lowered his weapon, his expression shifting to one of disbelief. I didn't know," Mark stammered. "You didn't know because you didn't listen," Henry replied, his voice calm but edged with disappointment. "You made assumptions instead of asking questions." The elderly woman stepped forward, her voice steady now. "He's telling the truth. He saved me." Those young men ran off when he stepped in. Mark's face flushed as he glanced at the crowd, now openly criticizing his actions. Just then, another squad car arrived. Sergeant Claire Woods stepped out, her expression serious. "What's going on here?" she asked. Henry explained the sequence of events, handing over his badge for verification. As she listened, Claire's demeanor darkened. "Is this accurate, Officer Hendricks?" she asked, turning to Mark. He nodded reluctantly. "Yes, ma'am." Within minutes, Mark was instructed to surrender his weapon and badge, pending an internal review. The crowd watched as the officer was escorted away, murmurs of justice rippling through the onlookers. Turning to the woman, Henry placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Are you sure you're all right?" She nodded, gratitude shining through her tear-streaked face. "You didn't just save me. You stood up for what's right." Henry smiled faintly. "That's what justice is about. Not just the law, but protecting each other." As the scene dispersed, Henry resumed his jog, his stride purposeful. The streets of Maplewood felt different now, a community reminded of the power of doing what's right, even when it's not easy. As Henry jogged away, the crisp morning air felt sharper against his skin, invigorating yet heavy with the events that had just unfolded. The serene streets of Maplewood, usually a backdrop of calm and routine, now seemed alive with an unspoken energy, a ripple from the encounter that left its mark not only on Henry, but on everyone who had witnessed it. The murmurs of the small crowd still echoed in his mind. Some people called him a hero, while others whispered criticisms about the officer's actions. For Henry, it wasn't about heroism. It was about doing what he had always believed in, standing up when someone needed help, regardless of the risks or misunderstandings that might follow. As he turned the corner, Henry slowed his pace, reflecting on the irony of the situation. Decades ago, he had stood in courtrooms across the country, prosecuting criminals and upholding the law. He had worked tirelessly to ensure fairness and integrity in a system that wasn't always perfect. Yet today, he found himself on the receiving end of a judgment made hastily and without care, a reminder of how fragile justice could be when wielded without thought. He thought of the officer, Mark Hendricks. Henry wasn't angry. He was disappointed. It wasn't the young officer's mistake alone, but a reflection of something much deeper. Assumptions, biases, and fear had clouded his judgment, leading to a dangerous escalation that could have ended much worse. Henry knew he couldn't just let the incident fade into memory. It was an opportunity to educate, to push for change. As he neared his home, Henry noticed his neighbor, a retired teacher named Mrs. Ellison, tending to her flower bed. She looked up and waved. "I heard what happened downtown," she called out. "You're quite the talk of the town now." Henry chuckled softly, pausing to greet her. "I didn't plan on making headlines during my morning jog." "Well," Mrs. Ellison said, dusting her gloves off, "Maplewood could use a reminder that integrity doesn't retire. You've given us something to think about." Henry nodded, her words settling in his chest. He realized how much he valued the trust and connection of his community, and he felt an even stronger resolve to use his experience to foster understanding. It wasn't enough to intervene in the moment. Lasting change required conversations, education, and action. Later that afternoon, Henry reached out to Sergeant Woods, offering to meet with her team to discuss the incident. He wanted to share his perspective, not as a victim or former prosecutor, but as someone who believed in the potential for a better system. To his surprise, she welcomed the idea and arranged for a town hall meeting where officers, community members, and local leaders could openly address their concerns and ideas for rebuilding trust. The following week, Maplewood's community center was packed. Henry stood at the front, recounting his story and emphasizing the importance of understanding over assumption. As he looked out at the crowd, diverse in age, background, and beliefs, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. Justice, he realized, wasn't just about the actions of one man or the policies of a single department. It was about everyone working together to ensure fairness, respect, and humanity for all. And for Henry Carter, his work wasn't over. It was just beginning.